Tour the cruise ports, the history of Alaska.
Table of Contents, Alaska History.
Dr. Sydney Soclof. drsidney22@gmail.com. 2022.
Narration by Dr. Sydney Soclof,
Zoe Phonemes.
And Nathan Koltov.
To play or pause the video, select the appropriate icon, or press the K key or the space bar.
The right and left arrow keys will advance or retard the video by 5 seconds, respectively, in both the play and pause modes.
If you see this in the upper right corner of the video, and you select the left mouse button, it will give you a list of recommended videos or a playlist of related videos. If you select this arrow and then exit the full screen, you will see a display of the chapters like this example. This is the listing of the first 6 chapters, and by scrolling down, you can see the rest of the chapters.
Chapter 2. Introduction. The History of Alaska.
They came for me. WHO.
The Promysloviki.
The Russian Fur Hunters.
Russia in America and the history of Alaska. These are the stepping stones of Alaska's history, from food to gold, to fish, and oil, and finally to the tourist industry.
First, fur.
Chapter 3. Peter the Great. Our story starts with Peter the First, Tsar of all the Russias, who was also later known as Peter the Great.
This is Pyotr Alexeyevich Romanov.
Peter Alexeyevich Romanov, Peter the First, usually known as Peter the Great, was born in 1672 in Moscow.
Peter was the son of Tsar Alexis, and the grandson of the Tsar Michael Romanov, who was chosen to be a Tsar in 1613, and started the Romanov dynasty.
In 1682, at the age of 10, Peter was proclaimed Tsar.
At that time Russia was a very backward country. Peter's lifelong goal was to modernize Russia. For that he had to open Russia up to the west. In the 17th century, transportation and communication by land routes was very difficult. The only practical way to do that was by sea. Peter invited the best European engineers, shipbuilders, architects, craftsmen and merchants to come to Russia. Hundreds of Russians were sent to Europe to get the best education and learn different arts and crafts. Peter himself went to Holland and studied all aspects of shipbuilding. Peter was interested in the territorial expansion of Russia in the West. He fought and won the Great Northern War in the years 1700 to 1721 with Sweden, and established the city of St. Petersburg.
This shows the expansion of Russia under Peter the Great. At the beginning of Peter the Great's reign, Russia occupied a vast territory some 6,000 miles in extent all of the way to the Pacific Ocean. However, access to the west was blocked by Sweden in the north and the Ottoman Empire in the south.
The Ottoman Empire in the south occupied the shores of the Black Sea, and also controlled passage to the Mediterranean Sea through the Straits of the Dardanelles.
This shows the expansion of Russia under Peter the Great. Peter the Great gained access to the Baltic Sea.
But it wasn't until his successor, Catherine the Great, that Russia conquered the Ottoman territory on the north shore of the Black Sea.
Here is St. Petersburg, very close to Finland and the Baltic countries of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania.
With St. Petersburg, Russia has an ice-free port all year round, with access to the Baltic Sea, and thence to the North Sea and the Atlantic Ocean.
Chapter 4. The expansion of Russia. Russia is a huge country. In fact, the largest in area in the world.
The distance from St. Petersburg on the west to Vladivostok on the Pacific Ocean on the east is 4,071 miles or 6,550 kilometers. Russia extends from Europe to Asia. The dividing line between European Russia and Asian Russia is generally considered to be the Ural Mountains.
The northern and western parts of Asiatic Russia is the frigid region known as Siberia.
St. Petersburg is in the far western part of Russia.
Since prehistoric times, Siberia was occupied by various groups of nomadic tribes. The area was conquered by the Mongols in the 13th century, who spread to the west and eventually controlled most of present-day Russia. With the growing power of Russia, the Mongols were defeated and groups of traders and fur hunters began to enter Siberia. And then the Imperial Russian Army under Vitus began to set up forts further and further east.
With the steady advance of the fur trappers or Promyshleniki, by 1639, the Russian-controlled areas had been extended to the Pacific at the Sea of Okhotsk.
Siberia remained a mostly unexplored and uninhabited area. During the following few centuries, only a few exploratory missions and traders inhabited Siberia.
The other group that was sent to Siberia were prisoners exiled from Western Russia. Even in modern times, Siberia remains sparsely populated compared to European Russia.
Chapter 5. The Great Northern Expedition.
Vitus Bering was born in Denmark in 1681. He joined the Russian Navy in 1703. In 1724, Peter the Great, Tsar of Russia, ordered Captain Bering to explore the land east of Siberia.
The expedition was to determine whether Asia and North America were connected by land. Because Russia was interested both in colonial expansion in North America and in finding a northeast passage, a sea route to China around Siberia.
In 1725, Bering and his expedition made the long 7,000-mile, 11,270 kilometers, trek from St. Petersburg all of the way across Siberia to Okhotsk. His expedition had 150 men, and took an incredible 4 years to travel from St. Petersburg to Okhotsk.
They traveled from Okhotsk across the Gulf of Okhotsk to the Kamchatka Peninsula.
From Okhotsk in 1725, they crossed over to the Kamchatka Peninsula, where they built a small ship, the Sviatoy Gavril, St. Gabriel. In 1728, Bering sailed northward from Kamchatka through the Bering Strait, until he could no longer observe any extension of the land to the north, or its appearance to the east, proving that Asia and North America are indeed separate continents. However, because of clouds and fog, the coast of North America is never seen.
In summer of 1730, Bering returned to St. Petersburg. Bering was subsequently commissioned to do a further expedition, and returned to Okhotsk in 1735.
In 1740, Bering established the settlement of Petropavlovsk on the Kamchatka Peninsula. Local craftsmen built two vessels, the Sviatoy Pyotr, St. Peter, and the Sviatoy Pavel, St. Paul.
Then in 1741, Bering then started on his second voyage of exploration.
Bering led an expedition from Petropavlovsk towards America. A storm separated the ships, but Bering on the Sviatoy Pyotr, St. Peter, sighted the southern coast of Alaska, and a landing was made at Kayak Island, or in the vicinity.
The second ship, the Sviatoy Pavel, St. Paul, under the command of Alexei Kyrikov, discovered the shores of the Alexander Archipelago of present-day Alaska.
After a total of 16 years of searching, and now after a voyage of 5 weeks at sea in the Gulf of Alaska, Bering had finally discovered the Alaska coast.
An expedition is sent to the land for fresh water, and after just one day, Bering sets sail for home.
These voyages of Bering and Chirikov were a major part of the Russian exploration efforts in the North Pacific, known today as the Great Northern Expedition, and established the original Russian claim to the region. On the way home to Kamchatka, the Bering expedition followed the Aleutian Island chain. Bering and many of his crew were stricken with scurvy because of the lack of fresh vegetables in their diet.
After being beset by fierce autumn storms, the Sviatoy Pyotr became shipwrecked on an island that will later be known as Bering Island. One month after being shipwrecked in the island, Bering died. During next 8 months, 28 other men died here.
This is a Russian postage stamp honoring Vitus Bering in August 1991. Bering's grave and the graves of 5 other seamen were discovered by a combined Russian-Danish expedition.
The remains were transported to Moscow, where they were investigated by the forensic physicians who succeeded in recreating Bering's appearance. Examination of Bering's teeth showed no sign of scurvy, leading to the conclusion that he died of some other disease.
It was long before the value of Bering's work was fully recognized, but Captain Cook was able to prove his accuracy as an observer.
Nowadays, the Bering Strait, the Bering Sea, Bering Island and the Bering Land Bridge bear the Russian explorer's name.
In 1992, Bering and the other sailors were buried a second time on Bering Island.
The remainder of the crew built a boat, also named the Sviatoy Pyotr from the wreckage. They sailed back to Kamchatka on August 15, 1742, 9 months after being shipwrecked on Bering Island. They reached Kamchatka August 25, bringing back hundreds of fur pelts. Their tales of wealth and furs sent trappers and traders to exploit the new lands and starts interest in fur hunting and trading in Alaska.
Chapter 6. Fur. Many of the Russian fur traders who had been trapping fur in Siberia now started to move east along the Aleutian Island chain, hunting and trading for sea otter pelts. A fur trading base was established on Kodiak Island.
Russian fur traders set up their first outpost at Three Saints Bay on Kodiak Island in 1784.
The native people we cheated, abused, and massacred. Food-bearing animals of sea and land we wantonly slaughtered. The sea otter was almost exterminated.
Chapter 7. Russian-American Company.
Some of the abuses were reduced when, in 1799, Tsar Paul I chartered the Russian-American Company to administer the settlements.
The Russian-American Company was a commercial hunting and trading company chartered by the Tsarist government, with shares held by the members of the Tsar's family, court nobility and high officials. The director for 19 years was Alexander Baranov, who ruled Russian America like an emperor.
In 1804, the Russian colonists established New Archangel, now Sitka. It became the headquarters of the Russian-American Company and the capital of the colony.
New Archangel, or in Russian Novoarkhangelsk, is not named after the Russian city of Archangel, Arkhangelsk, in the far north of Russia on the Barents Sea. Rather, it was named after an earlier settlement a few miles away called St. Michael Archangel.
After an attack by the local natives, the settlement was moved and called New Archangel. Alaska's many Russian Orthodox churches with their onion-shaped domes date from this period.
A good example is the St. Nicholas Russian Orthodox Church in Juneau. By the early 1800s, Russian entrepreneurs were exporting an average of 62,000 fur pelts from North America each year. Even though over 80% of the pelts were seal fur, the nearly 5% that were sea otter pelts were the most valuable.
Chapter 8. Fort Ross. The settlement of Fort Ross, the name derived from the word for Russia Russia, was established by the Russian-American Company on the California coast just north of the furthest Spanish settlement.
This is Siberia in Russian America in the 1800s. Note the location for Fort Ross in New Archangel, Novoarkhangelsk, present-day Sitka.
Trade was vital to Russian outposts in Alaska, where long winters exhausted supplies and the settlements could not grow enough food to support themselves. California was the logical choice. Alexander Baranov directed his chief deputy, Ivan Alexandrovich Kuskov, to establish a colony in California as a food source for Alaska and to hunt profitable sea otters. After several reconnaissance missions, Kuskov arrived at site of Fort Ross in March of 1812. Fort Ross is located on the California coast, some 2,000 miles south of the Russian settlement at New Archangel Sitka.
Fort Ross is about 100 miles, 160 kilometers, north of San Francisco and due west from Sacramento. After negotiating with the Kashaut-Pomo people who inhabited the area, Kuskov began construction of the fort. The carpenters who accompanied Kuskov to Fort Ross, along with their native Alaskan helpers, had worked on forts in Alaska, and the construction here followed models of the traditional stockade, blockhouses and long buildings found in Siberia and Alaska.
Fort Ross is on the California Coast Highway 1.
The stockade at Fort Ross was completed 5 months after the initial landing, in August of 1812.
By 1820, the stockade interior contained the house of the manager, now called the Kuskov House, the quarters of other officials, barracks for the Russian employees, and various storehouses and lesser structures. The Russian Orthodox chapel was added about 1824.
This is Fort Ross as seen from the coastal terrace.
This is a watercolor of Fort Ross by Ilya Voznesenky, 1841.
The large Russian Orthodox cross in the foreground marks the site of the old Russian cemetery, with the fort compound in the background. Here are some pictures of the well and blockhouse at Fort Ross. Chapter 9. The end of Fort Ross.
Spain had laid claim to the entire Pacific coast, including the area where Fort Ross was located.
Priests of the Franciscan order together with soldiers and colonists we sent north from Mexico to establish a chain of missions in California.
Their missions were spaced roughly a day's march apart, or about 30 miles, and ran from San Diego in the south to Sonoma and San Rafael in the north, just beyond San Francisco.
By 1839, officials of the Russian-American Company had decided to abandon the colony. The California sea otter population had been largely depleted by the mid-1830s, and the Russian shift of emphasis from hunting to farming and stock raising, to produce large quantities of grain, beef, and dairy products, did not match expectations. Moreover, the experiment in shipbuilding, while impressive in the short run, proved effective over time, and trade in manufactured goods did not return enough profit to offset deficits.
At the same time, the Mexican government encouraged new settlers to go into the area. There was also a growing influx of Americans. This posed a challenge to Russian claims of the territory.
Neither the imperial government in distant St. Petersburg nor the Russian-American Company was willing or able to meet this challenge.
Alexander Gavrilovich Rochev was the last manager of the Ross settlement, and served from 1838 to 1841. Rochev was charged with selling the colony and its assets.
Rochev first approached the Hudson's Bay Company regarding the purchase, but the British turned down the offer in 1840.
He then made overtures to France through the French military attaché in Mexico City, but he declined to put forth a bid, on the grounds that he lacked authority in such matters.
Rochev then offered the outpost to Mexico, but it rejected the Russian terms, partly because it already considered Fort Ross as legally its own, and possibly because it hoped that the Russians would simply abandon the outpost.
Rachev then approached Captain Sutter at his ranch in the Sacramento Valley, and in 1841 Sutter agreed to buy the Russian-American company's assets. This included all the buildings, livestock, and implements, but not the land itself, which was still claimed by Mexico. The sale price was $30,000. On January 1, 1842, the flag of the Russian-American Company was lowered at Fort Ross, and Rachev and about 100 colonists sailed from Bodega Bay on the last Russian ship bound for Sitka. After 30 years, the Russian epoch in the history of California had come to a close.
Fort Ross is now a California State Historic Park. The fort has been reconstructed, and the Rachev House is today the only remaining original structure of Fort Ross. The Rachev House is thought to be the oldest standing structure between San Francisco and Alaska.
This sale of the Russian possessions in California in 1842 was to be followed only 25 years later by the sale of Alaska to the United States. The withdrawal from Fort Ross, Russia's easternmost outpost, signaled a turning point in the expansion of the Russian Empire. Chapter 10. The Sale of Alaska. The Alaska Purchase of 1867.
As the world's largest contiguous empire, Imperial Russia chose to redirect its energies and consolidate itself on only 2 continents instead of 3.
The distance and difficulty of reaching North America from Russia was simply too great, especially in the days before the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which was not completed until 1905. United States and British competition had made the Russian-American Company unprofitable, and Russian involvement in the Crimean War left the Alaskan colony vulnerable. As a result, Russia tried to sell Alaska to the United States as early as 1855.
Chapter 11. Why didn't Canada buy Alaska?
Why didn't Canada buy Alaska? After all, looking at the map, this looks like a logical thing for Canada to do. After all, Alaska is separated from the lower 48 states by several hundred miles of Canadian territory.
Indeed, from the U.S.-Canada border to the most southerly point in Alaska is 504 miles, or 812 kilometers, and to Anchorage the distance is 1,338 miles, or 2,152 kilometers.
So why didn't Canada buy Alaska? First of all, in the early 1860s these was no unified country of Canada as such, just the separate eastern provinces, such as Quebec and Ontario under British rule. Canada first became a united country only in 1867.
British Columbia was a British Crown colony and not originally part of the rest of Canada. British Columbia would agree to join the other provinces only if it was promised that a transcontinental railroad would be built to connect it with the rest of Canada.
That was agreed to, and even before the railroad was completed. In 1871 the Dominion of Canada was extended from the Atlantic to the Pacific, when British Columbia became the 6th province.
The Transcontinental Railroad across Canada was begun in 1881 and completed in 1887, with Vancouver becoming the western terminus of the Canadian Pacific Railway.
The region to the north of British Columbia, where the Yukon is today, was just a vast unpopulated wilderness and became organized as the Northwest Territories in 1869.
Chapter 12. U.S. Purchase of Alaska. Meanwhile, the United States had been steadily expanding over the years and reached the Pacific coast with the Mexican Cession of 1848 at the end of the Mexican-American War, and also with the settlement of the Oregon Territory in 1846 after resolving issues with Britain.
The Transcontinental Railroad across the U.S. was begun in 1863 and completed in 1869 from Omaha to Sacramento. Shortly afterwards it was extended to San Francisco. This put Alaska within easier reach by railroad to San Francisco and by steamer up the coast. This was much before the Trans-Canadian Railroad was even begun.
The United States Treaty to purchase the land was negotiated in 1867 at the insistence of Secretary of State William H. Seward, during the administration of President Andrew Johnson.
The skeptical American people called Alaska Seward's Folly and Seward's Icebox. The price of $7.2 million in 1867 correspond to about $100 billion today. So I think you can see why many people at that time were skeptical of the purchase. Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts supported the measure in the Senate and suggested the present name of the new possession.
The date of the transfer of ownership was October 18, which is now celebrated as Alaska Day. Chapter 13. The Territory of Alaska. From the time of the purchase in 1867 until 1884, there was no civil government, and Alaska was under the jurisdiction of the Army and then the Navy.
In 1884, Alaska became a district governed by the laws of the state of Oregon, with the passage of the first Organic Act by the U.S. Congress.
When Oregon became a state in 1859, it included the present states of Washington and Idaho, as well as small parts of Idaho and Wyoming. Therefore, it comprised all of the present-day Pacific Northwest. The Second Organic Act of 1912, signed by President William Howard Taft on August 24, made Alaska an unincorporated territory. Chapter 14. Gold in Alaska. Then there was the discovery of gold. On August 17, 1880, gold was discovered by Joe Juneau and Dick Harris at the Silver Bowl Basin, the present site of Juneau. The region around Juneau became the site of much gold mining activity in the 1880s. This shows gold mining near Juneau in the 1880s.
Then in 1896, a violent and colorful era began with the discovery of gold in the Klondike region of Canada.
That started the Klondike Gold Rush of 1898. Hordes of prospectors traveled the most accessible route, which was through Skagway in southeastern Alaska.
The Klondike region was in the remote Yukon Territory of Canada, on the Klondike River. The Klondike is a tributary of the Yukon River that flows through Canada on the way to Alaska and the Pacific Ocean.
There were three major routes taken by the gold seekers. One was the all-water route from Seattle by ship to St. Michael in Alaska, and then by steamboat up the Yukon River to the Klondike.
The second route was the All-Canada route. And the third and most popular route was by ship from Seattle to Skagway or Odaia, just a few miles distant from Skagway, and then by land into Canada, and then Yukon River to the Klondike.
One important trail was the White Pass Trail from Skagway to Bennett Lake, and then down the Yukon River to the Klondike goldfields. A second trail was the Chilkoot Trail from Odaia, which also led to Bennett Lake. Before the Klondike strike subsided, a fresh rush began at Nome, on the Seward Peninsula of Alaska. Again, in 1902, there was a scramble to stake claims, this time in the Fairbanks region.
Chapter 15 World War II. The invasion of Alaska. The gold rush represented invasions of a particular kind. Now we turn our attention to another invasion. This one a military one.
In 1942, during World War II, Japanese forces first bombed the U.S. Army Air Corps base at Dutch Harbor, at the eastern end of the Aleutian Islands.
Then they occupied and fortified Kiska and Attu Islands in the Aleutian chain.
In the summer of 1943, United States forces, aided by Canadian troops, recaptured the islands.
To ensure Alaska's safety, the United States rushed the construction of the Alaska Highway. The Alaska Highway ran from Dawson Creek in British Columbia to Fairbanks, Alaska.
As shown on this 1943 map of the Alaska Highway, it connected at Dawson Creek to the highway from Edmonton, Alberta and points south.
This is shown on this 1943 map of the Alaska Highway. Prior to the Japanese invasion, there was an existing highway from Dawson Creek to Edmonton, Alberta and points south.
The highway, now known as the Alcan Highway, continued from Dawson Creek north to Fairbanks. Chapter 16. Alaska Statehood. Alaska, the 49th state.
On June 30, 1958, the United States Senate voted by 64-20 approval of the Alaska Statehood bill that had been passed by the House of Representatives.
A state referendum in Alaska supported statehood by a 5-1 margin. President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the Statehood Proclamation on January 3, 1959, and Alaska officially became the 49th state.
Of great importance to national defense, the long Alaskan perimeter is guarded by United States Army, Air Force and Navy units. The Statehood Act provided that, in the case of an emergency, about 260,500 square miles, 674,690 square kilometers, of land in the northern and western parts of the state, including the entire Aleutian Islands chain, would be placed under federal control. Chapter 17. Earthquakes. Earthquakes.
All around the Pacific Ocean where the Big Pacific Plate meets surrounding plates, there is an area of strong earthquake and volcanic activity called the Ring of Fire.
This arc around the Pacific Rim is called the Ring of Fire because of the concentration of volcanic and seismic activity. The Mudjo Trenches on the map indicated by the red lines, are located where tectonic plates meet, with one being driven under an oath.
The Aleutian Island chain, or archipelago, was formed by a series of volcanoes erupting at the boundary of the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate.
In the lower 48 states, this chain of volcanoes is continued by many others, including Mount Rainier and Mount St. Helens in Washington, Mount Hood in Oregon, and Mount Shasta and Mount Lassen in California.
This process of mountain building can be the result of one plate sliding underneath another plate, called subduction. This produces cracks in the Earth's crust.
The resulting heat and pressure causes the rocks to melt, forming molten magma. This then percolates upward through the cracks to become lava flows and volcanoes.
This is where the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate meet all along the west coast of the U.S. and Canada.
The Pacific Plate is moving in a northwesterly direction underneath the North American Plate at a rate of about 2 inches or 5 centimeters per year.
In years to come, Los Angeles, riding on the Pacific Plate, will likely become a suburb of San Francisco. In the intense 1964 earthquake, often known as the Good Friday earthquake because of the date of its occurrence, more than 100 lives were lost, and damage reached an estimated $500 million.
Some of Anchorage's business district was leveled, and its neighborhood suffered heavy damage. Chapter 18. Oil. Moving away from this disaster, we will now turn our attention to oil exploration and extraction on Alaska's North Slope. Important petroleum operations began with the discovery of oil on the Kenai Peninsula in 1957.
The largest petroleum deposits in North America were discovered in the northern Prudhoe Bay area in 1968.
An 800-mile, 1,280 kilometers, pipeline from the area of Prudhoe Bay to the Allier port of Valdez, in the south, was completed in 1977.
The construction of the pipeline and the increase in oil production brought about significant growth of Alaska's economy and population. The oil as it comes out of the ground is very hot, so the pipeline must be elevated in order not to melt the permafrost. Oil spills.
The most disastrous oil spill in North American history occurred off the Alaska coast near the port of Valdez in 1989.
Valdez is the southern terminus of the Alaska Pipeline, which runs from Prudhoe Bay on the north slope all of the way across Alaska to the port of Valdez on Prince William Sound.
In 1989, the supertanker Exxon Valdez ran aground and spilled more than 10 million gallons of crude oil into Prince William Sound, causing extensive damage to wildlife, wilderness areas, and commercial fishing. An army of helpers rushed to fight the damage. Local people devoted their normal fishing time to collecting oil. Even the Soviet Union loaned the use of an oil skimming ship. Others helped by cleaning the polluted beaches and soiled animals. This shows the extent of the Exxon oil spill in 1989, eventually spreading out to the Aleutian Islands, more than 100 miles, 160 kilometers, away.
The tourist industry is rapidly becoming a very important part of the Alaska economy, especially in the Panhandle region of southeastern Alaska.
Chapter 19. Recommended videos, Alaska History.
Recommended video. The Modern History of Alaska, 1741 to 1959. 4 minutes. 27 seconds.
Recommended video, Why Russia Actually Had to Sell Alaska to the United States. 11 minutes. 9 seconds.
Recommended video. Why did Russia sell Alaska to America? 3 minutes. 14 seconds.
Recommended video, The Forgotten Russian Colony, Russian Alaska. 10 minutes. 33 seconds.
Recommended video, Quick History Guide to Alaska. 2 minutes. 57 seconds.
Table of Contents, Alaska History.
Thanks for watching.